All right, good deal. Well, I want to first thank you for giving me the opportunity to share my experiences today. I hope many of you find it helpful, and I do appreciate any feedback following the presentation. You could do that on Twitter just by sharing that you enjoyed it, or if you've got feature requests, those are probably the more exciting feedback that I receive because it gives me an opportunity to just make the module better. And as mentioned, today I'd like to discuss improvements coming in SPE 6.2. Just by a round of applause, who has worked with PowerShell extensions? All right, that's a thunderous applause. So I imagine most of you have seen or heard of it, maybe talked about it through work conversations. So that's really what we're going to talk about today. I'd like to first thank the GitHub sponsors that are in a very meaningful way supporting me on GitHub. If you have any interest, or you know someone, or your company has any interest in sponsoring me for a short period of time, a one-off kind of sponsorship, you can go to the GitHub page. In any of the repositories I contributed to, there's a sponsor button. And I do have a number of sponsors, and I want to once again thank them for doing so. Now, I wanted to share some very strange photos I took this morning. So I was letting this puppy out. This is our new puppy, and that's why I'm up so early for most mornings. And you'll notice that this little slide on the right, the little kid slide, it casts the strangest photo, the strangest shadow in this photo. And I sent it to my wife, and she's like, "What is that?" And it turns out that these holes right here, I think they were like for a basketball goal. They cast this face. And it seems so appropriate given that this month Halloween is coming up, and just to frighten you a little bit when you're standing outside at night. So today's presentation content is going to include a few things. Overview with helpful resources. Hopefully you find it helpful. Some security improvements that are coming in the module. As I've probably announced a number of times, 6.2 is like on its way out the door. I did in fact receive a bug report, and it was kind of a big deal. So I've just postponed it a little bit to make sure that that's thoroughly tested. But hopefully in this next 7 days, it'll be published, and you'll of course hear about it on Twitter and Slack and other resources. And then we've got some just a few command improvements, especially this bug one that I mentioned that didn't make its way into the slides. And then a content migrator that I've been working on for way too long, but I think it's turned out pretty good. All right. So helpful resources. If you've not already seen it, there's an official Sitecore PowerShell Extensions documentation site. And if you've not seen it, you're really missing out, because this has an aggregate of all sorts of knowledge that has been accumulated over the years. In some cases, you'll see that pages are almost complete copies of a blog post from Adam, or I took a ton of screenshots in developing a feature, and so they made their way into this book. I think one really helpful, more recent page that I've created is the training section. And this walks you through some conversions from C# to PowerShell. So for example, there are certain syntaxes in PowerShell that work, but if you're trying to squeeze out just a little bit of performance, you might find that going a more C# familiar syntax is better. For example, there's an array that you can create in PowerShell, and it's usually notated with the @ symbol and then 2 parentheses. But in fact, you can make that a more generic collection, like array list and a list of strings, for example. and those will perform much better because of memory allocation and other reasons. So I encourage you to check out the training section, and hopefully that helps it, improve your PowerShelling experience. There's also a SPE channel on Slack. If you've not signed up, you'd want to go to sitecore.chat. There's a request form. Really, the reason why there is a request form is because we don't want there to be a flood of accounts generated through bots and other purposes. So we also field out recruiters, funny enough. This is intended to be a community safe for, software engineers, for Sitecore software engineers, marketers, people who just want to ask questions and help each other with Sitecore product. And so we want to sort of reduce the volume of people who are there just to try to siphon your information or bug you about a job. So I do encourage you, if you are, a front-end developer, back-end developer, a marketer, that you sign up and check out the different channels that appear on the left. You can join those. Now, SPE is one of those channels that you are automatically signed up for when you join, but you're welcome to, obviously leave a channel if it doesn't suit your interests. And the Sitecore Stack Exchange, this is a sort of a different approach. So if you're familiar with Stack Overflow, this is intended for direct questions. So if you've got a question like, how do I change the alt text for a picture? That can be asked very directly and responded with a very specific answer. You want to avoid like opinions, like, hey, tell me what's the differences between PowerShell 1 and 2. That isn't really appropriate. You'd want Slack or Twitter or some other conversational platform. And so check out Stack Exchange and be sure to vote up on answers and questions that you find helpful, because that encourages those that have answered or asked the questions to continue to do so. All right, so security improvements. Elevated session state is a feature that's built into SPE. You may have seen this in recent years where you install it and then you're bugged by some dialogue or some little yellow bar at the top that says, the session must be elevated. And so typically on a developer workstation, you're going to like disable it completely. You don't want to see it at all. And so what we've done here is, and what you can see in this picture, is immediately after opening one of the PowerShell dialogues, in this case, the console, but you would still see this with the ISE, or if you were in the content editor and you were trying to save like a script, you would be in some way presented with something on screen that says, hey, you need to elevate. And in this particular case, you can see that I'm presented with a dialogue and I have an OK button. And that's where we're moving towards when you're already authenticated, right? So we're not really taking away anything, but what we're doing is we're facilitating an improvement to this experience. So you have 4 options for this kind of dialogue for session elevation. You can either just completely allow it, which is often done for development workstations. There's a password requirement, which is like the standard install. And then there's a block. So in an example where you don't want anyone ever to run the console in production, you want them to be in the ISE, for example, or you don't even want them to open the editor experiences, then you can mark it as block. And then when they go to the tool and they click the button, it pops up. It's just like, hey, nope, you can't use it. And what we did recently find is as more companies and installations are making use of identity server or some federated authentication, that being able to properly validate a password is more difficult. especially like if you're using Azure AD or ADFS. And so we could introduce new complexity to SPE, or we can just provide an alternative path that, once again, doesn't take away from security, but it just allows for you to have a better experience. And so what we've done with this dialog is we've removed the password requirement by instead of having a password setting, you would actually just say that it's confirm, and then you just hit OK. So when you do the installation, if you've deployed a config that patches the settings, well then, as soon as a developer or administrator goes to the screen, they get prompted with the OK button, they click it, and they just then run their scripts and do whatever they need. You still have the timeout on the session, so if you find that 5 minutes is too short, you can make it 10 or 20 or whatever is appropriate. Obviously, you don't want to do something that's really long, like a day, but you don't want it to be so short that it becomes an impediment for your progress. And I didn't think this through when I copied the slides. So as far as the PowerShell script admin page is concerned, there was a request from the community that it would be neat to have a page similar to the SQL shell. And so if you're not familiar with that, when you go to the /sitecore/admin page, you're presented with this like laundry list of links. And on there, there's a SQL shell page. Now, I have been able to alter what's on the page because that's sort of like baked into Sitecore. But you can have your own custom pages dropped in that directory structure. And then if a user goes to that URL, you can then make use of the tool. So this, you'd be familiar with like going to the cache page or the show config. It's the same directory. There's just a bunch of web forms that are embedded into that directory. I guess not really embedded, but copied into that directory. You can do that through deployments or whatever means you find necessary. And then you can build utilities for people. So there's like cache tuners and other neat stuff. And so, so what we've done is we've created a console that it's like a clone of the SQL shell, where it's like no frills kind of page. You're just presented with a box for a script. You have an execute button, and then you have results. And so you don't get syntax highlighting in the text box. You don't get autocomplete. You don't get any of that kind of fun stuff. But you don't always need that. Imagine needing to go just run a quick SQL statement. You would go to the SQL shell. You would make sure it's enabled. You would run the SQL, and then you're done. Like you don't need a whole lot. And hopefully, you're not authoring those queries on the page. Like you've gone to a non-prod environment. You've opened up SSMS. You've created your script. You know exactly what's supposed to happen, and then you come to this page and you paste it in there. So that's really what the focus is just enabling you to just quickly do this. So as you can see, there is some, nice features like the font. You get some nice things about it, but once again, it's a no frills kind of page, and it does require some additional configuration for this to work. So similar to the SQL shell page, you have this enabled and disabled file combination. So I don't recall which version of Sitecore this was introduced in, but essentially the way it works is if there's a, I guess you say, an extensionless file that's called enabled on the drive in the same path, as long as that enabled file exists and the disabled file does not exist, as you can see in this in the instructions here, then these pages can be reached. So this screenshot was taken when the enabled file was missing and maybe the disabled file was there. It didn't really matter because the enabled file has to be there. But the nice feature of, I guess, security feature about this is that if you purposefully don't want the page to ever be used, then you can just create an enabled file and deploy that onto the machine, and then no matter what, the dialog is never used. So you might consider giving it a shot and say, hey, this is super helpful. But once again, this doesn't take away from the console in the ISE that's already available. But see, all of that's required through the content editor. All right, and remoting. This is I think the funnest feature, because it allows you to interact with Sitecore without actually being in Sitecore, right? Like you don't have to be in the browser in the content editor. And if you're not familiar with the SPE Remoting or the Web API, essentially those are two capabilities included in Sitecore PowerShell Extensions. So install the module, they are available, ready to go. You have to opt in on using them, so you have to create a patch that enables remoting, that enables Web API, and several of the other features. So we're trying to be considerate of the fact that we don't want to just force everything on the user, and in many cases, it's appropriate to just make it immediately available. In other cases, it makes sense to require it to be an opt-in, so it doesn't just sort of disrupt your environment. Now, in the case of the Web API, you're essentially creating scripts in Sitecore, and then you access those through a URL. Once upon a time, Adam and I presented at, I think it was SubCon in New Orleans, this maybe 2015 time, and we presented on the fact that maybe you wanted to. Oh, this is so funny. Adam was Think Dilbert, and I was the pointy-haired boss. If you're familiar with the Dilbert comics, and so I was standing next to Adam, and I was, dictating requirements and telling him I want this and I want that, and so he basically wrote a report and was able to create a shortcut for the pointy-haired boss so that he could see results from Sitecore. And that may not be your use case, but it was certainly one that was enjoyable for that presentation. So SPE Remoting is a way for you to use vanilla Windows PowerShell. We've not yet done any development with .NET with PowerShell Core yet, but I hope to see that support be added in the future. But with SPE Remoting, you're basically writing scripts on your workstation, completely disconnected from Sitecore, but you are writing scripts that will be executed in Sitecore. And so if you have made use of that, there's a new security feature that you can make use of. Traditionally, it would have used a username and password, and in this particular case, you're using a shared secret. So shared secrets are not new. You might be familiar with that being used in Sitecore Sidekick. I built I called it Westco module, but it basically swapped out the token delegating handler that comes with Sitecore and allows you to use a shared secret for publishing or some of the other services. So imagine you do a deployment and you want to publish. This allowed you to use a shared secret to do that authentication. And in the case of Unicorn, there is a shared secret that allows you to perform a sync of your content, of your serialized items through PowerShell. And so you hit an endpoint and then the sync runs. Now, this doesn't work exactly the same way. I took a very simplistic approach where you provide a shared secret. This needs to be a very long string. For example, you can go to, I think it's grc.com, and when you hit the page, immediately they present you with a random, unique, long password or string, and I just take that and paste it into my config, and I'm good to go. It's guaranteed to be unique, kind of like GUIDs, but it's a very long and super unique kind of string. And so you would put that here. Perhaps you have your Sitecore instance behind some sort of reverse proxy, or yeah, that's probably the more common scenario where like you hit a URL like what is it, some other URL.com, but on the server, maybe you've got a load balanced content management system. And so you've got one that's reverse proxy for server A and one's for server B. And so you want to make sure that it picks it up properly. So this audience, which if you're familiar with JavaScript Web Tokens or JWT, you can provide details about who's the issuer, who's the audience, what's the name, and when does it expire. Like there's a bunch of little details. And Sitecore already has this token support, but this is a sort of SPE specific implementation to really kind of simplify the support and implementation for it. So the risk of you changing one thing in Sitecore and then it breaking this are very low. And here's an example, and these are actually taken from the GitHub issue. So that way in the future, if you ever are looking it up, you have access to it. You don't have to go find this presentation. It's out on GitHub. And so the simple example, or the basic example here, is that I have this shared secret and I want to impersonate this user. Now in SPE 6.2, not only do you have a Sitecore PowerShell Remoting Extensions, Sitecore PowerShell Extensions Remoting role, in that you can configure users to be part of that in order for remoting to work. In 6.2, we're adding an actual user. So you might be familiar when you do a brand new installation and you see that Sitecore comes with a services API user, sort of following that example to say, look, I don't want to use admin all the time, or I don't want to have to create a new user all the time, because if I ever want to use the remoting feature, I have to do something. I have to either configure the admin role through a patch file. I have to add the admin role to the remoting user, the remoting role, or I have to do something. And so in this case, it just made sense. Why don't we just make it easy for people? We're going to add a new user. You go enable it. The user is part of the Sitecore PowerShell Extensions Remoting role, which is pre-configured to be a role that's allowed for remoting, but by default, there's no user in it. And then I can just pass all that detail to the script, and then I get what I want. So let's think about it for a moment. Why would I impersonate a user with a shared secret rather than require a password? Well, in the case of a password, one, you obviously have to know the password. So how is that any different than a shared secret? Two, when you're trying to authenticate a user, you have to actually go check, okay, do I trust this user, and is this the correct password? Well, assuming that it is the correct password, well, now you're just passing the password back and forth. Well, the shared secret is really no worse, but what we're doing instead is we are taking the shared secret, which is only ever on the machine that's running the script, and we generate a base64 string, which is just a message, and that message is being sent across the wire. And then on the Sitecore side, we're just validating the signature of the message. So we're not passing any passwords back and forth. We're just saying, hey, look, I wrote you a letter, and I'm going to mail you the letter. And when you get the letter, you're going to do something to authenticate that I sent you the letter. But once you've authenticated, then whatever's in it, you trust. Right? Where in the case of a password, we're actually sending the password and the username across the wire, which, it's in the basic header and you're using HTTPS. That might not be a big deal, but I'd rather there to be less of that kind of activity and just say, look, I'm going to sign the data I'm sending, and then you just validate that it was signed properly. And if you trust it, then great, do whatever I send you. And this ended up, I think, working out pretty well. While you might find holes in the approach, I think it's just as reliable. It's just as secure, probably more secure, because you have to take action to set this up. You have to intentionally configure the shared secret, intentionally write the script. And another key point is I had mentioned in the token that there's some payloads to it. And in that particular case, the payload includes an expiration time. So when this script runs, it will have some short duration. I think by default, I've put it to like 30 seconds. So when you run the script and it hits the server and it comes back, if someone tried to capture, like through Wireshark, that particular message and rerun it, it would be expired and then say, nope, you can't run that again. Now, that doesn't mean that they can't like get a hold of the shared secret because they have access to the machine, but it does prevent some sort of like replay of these messages and it forces you to rerun the script. So I think in general people will be pleased with it, and I'd love to see how your experience is working with it. All right, so moving on, command improvements. So you might be familiar with find item. This is effectively an implementation for the content search API queries. So let's say, for example, you want to query Solr or whatever your search engine configured is. In the past, it would have been Lucene. You want to query it and get, all items that contain Michael in the body or in the content field or whatever computed field that you might have. Find item allows for you to do that, but through PowerShell. So we actually take some structure that you write in your PowerShell script, and we transform that into the appropriate content search query. Well, the best use case for it is probably you want to go prove that a specific kind of query works with the results you expect. And when you've demonstrated that it works, then you could just go write the C# version of it and deploy that. So for example, you want to say, hey, give me the title and give me this, or give me this. You can work out those combinations. And so in other words, you can prototype it very quickly. Another really good use case is you want to write a report for a user using the show list view command, rather than like walk the entire tree, which is a really wasteful activity because you could go from a almost completely empty cache to now you've crawled 100,000 items and you only needed 3 of them, right? So trying to consider the performance implications instead of using get item or get child item, or maybe even instead of using item axis, get descendants, right? Or fast query, like you want to avoid these really expensive queries. What you can do is use find item and you search against the search engine, and then you can take whatever those results are and convert those into Sitecore items. So you can scan 1 million items, come back with 30 of them, and then all of that workload was put on the Solr side or the Coveo side or whatever side. And then you, on the Sitecore side in your script, you just take those 30 items and convert them into regular items, right? So they go from a search result item to a item, and now you can do whatever you want. So to have a better experience with that command, what we've done is we've allowed for you to also make use of the filter feature. So for those who are, the Solr gurus, there is a way that you can do like a faceted search, or you can filter results. So a filter is more specific to, I want to query these 100 items based on a title, but I want to filter out only the ones that are written in, I don't know, Spanish. And if you are using the filter, what that will do is it will reduce the results without changing the score of the data. So if you're not using that now in your content search queries, you might consider that. So you don't want the score to change, but you just want to reduce the results based on some other filtering criteria, the filter is the way to go. It's better than like query, come back with 100,000 items, and then on the server side dump a bunch until you get what you want. You're once again you're allowing Solr to take on that workload because it's designed to do that. So we sort of partially implemented this, and so 6.2 sort of finishes it out on another command. So here's a good example, I think, of how this was set up. So back in, I don't know, I guess this was, so this has been a while. So this first one at the top left, I think this was the first time that I had worked on it. So this would have been, you know, either March of this year or last year. I can't recall. It's been a while. What you can do is you can create predicates like you would in C#, where you say, hey, I want the first predicate to be and operations. So I want it to be, I think this is Canadian English. And then we have another predicate that is, in this case, is going to be the path, the criteria path. So this is like the Solr field name. Whereas in other cases, like in the below example, it's actually the object name on the C# POCO. So we're going to have the path. We want to do an AND operation. Now, why you see two of these? The first one is the operation I want to perform to get results, and then the second one, the filter. So I flipped that. So this one, I want to get everything under a particular path. And then the other one is I want to filter just for a particular language. So here we're doing two kinds of queries. One to give me everything that is under a particular path. And then only give me the things that have a particular language. The scoring stays the same. You just get less data. And so in the bottom example on the right, I realized that I didn't finish the feature, unfortunately. So I got it working in one example, but not in the other one. So this is using the dynamic link format. So if you've not used this find item before, you basically get 4 versions of it. You get using this predicate builder. You get this dynamic link where at runtime, SPE will evaluate the parameters that you've provided. So like paths and language, these are these are properties on the search result item object, and it sort of injects the appropriate details into that command. And so this would be an equivalent kind of query where you have the where condition, so where paths contains some value, and then the values that are mapped are going to be this here. So this is, I think this is like an array. So you could have comma separated, and then the where condition could be, you know, paths contains at 0 and something else contains whatever. And then the filter, so once again, this is a where predicate are these two, and the filter predicate are these two. In the dynamic link example, then you specify the language. The scope query approach, which you're probably familiar in the Sitecore UI, where you have this buckets search UI where you can type in a field name and it gives you the search results, right? This is like, you probably see this all the time where you click the little search icon and then it opens the screen, you get a little box, you got facets on the right. So that one doesn't really work well with trying to inject the filtering. So that doesn't have it at all. So just keep in mind that depending on what you're trying to accomplish, it might have made sense to implement it. So we've done that. And if we didn't implement it, it was probably for a good reason. But you're always welcome to ask, hey, how can I do X with this command? And maybe we can see a good use case to add it if it's not already. All right, I'm keeping track of time. Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, Michael, so you had a question here in the chat that can boosting be applied to the full filters?
Yes. So it's unfortunately it was cut off in the screenshot, and I debated on whether or not it made sense to force it there. But when you're building these queries, there's actually a boost option that you can provide. So in PowerShell, these would be called hash tables. So here I have a key value pair, and when you're doing, I think it's most commonly used in two different scenarios. One is when you're doing this this predicate version, because you're building a really complex query, or you can, and so it makes sense to have the boost added into here. I don't think the scope query option, and I'm not sure about this one, but I know there's the two options. So if you look in the docs, if you look in the doc.sitecorepowershell.com and you go to the appendix and you look up the find item command, it shows, I think there's like 13 or 15 examples of how to run find item against the search index. And they will include how to do boosting. And in this case, I'm boosting some number of points for matches on the path. So yeah, you can certainly do that. If you have some feedback on how well it works or what you think could be done different to sort of simplify it for users, feel free to open an issue or ask me on Slack. But I think the most common use case is covered by just using the key boost and then a value of, I think it's some sort of kind of like double or float value. Yep. One last comment about the find item is that you can create your own custom search result item. So if you've done that before, then you'll know what I'm talking about. If you've not, then by default, the Content Search API comes with a class called search result item. Typically, you just use that. But if you want to reduce the payload, or you want to add custom fields to be included in the results that actually come back from Solr. So in this case, you are actually storing the data in Solr, and you want that to come back in your query, then you would maybe inherit from search result item, or you'd create a custom one. Well, these commands do support creating a custom type for that. So in PowerShell, and then once again, this is in the docs, you can create a class in PowerShell. So PowerShell has a syntax for defining classes, and you just put in the appropriate properties. And then when you run the query, it will bring back results using those properties. So for the simple example in the docs is like a title search result item where all you wanted was the title. Then you can define that in PowerShell and then run it, and it loads the type. Should be able to work with a C# defined type. I don't think I've needed to use that much because you're going for convenience, and so defining it in PowerShell makes more sense. But if you have trouble getting that working, let me know. All right, and then real quick on the command update search index item, there are some PowerShell commands that make use of the index custodian APIs. So if you've kind of dug into Sitecore, they have some methods that you can call that will rebuild the search index, whether that be a single item, a tree of items, a specific index, or all of them. That can be managed through the PowerShell commands. Now, unfortunately, the name isn't quite the way that we would want it. So initialize search index item, by default, that does the whole tree. And what it kind of going back, what I would have wanted to do was to make this command by default only do the one item, and then there'd be a switch that you add which says include the entire tree. But by default, it does the whole tree, and if we changed it, it would potentially break it for everybody. And I'm not sure we're ready to say, hey, there's a breaking change. So we went ahead and just created an update search index item, and that will do a single item. So it's a little confusing, but the important part is that we have support for a single item and for the entire tree. and this is what you get. So now the fun part, content migrator. Okay, so this will be the lightning talk. So the content migrator is a self-contained script for content migration. The general idea is that I have met some prerequisites on both the source and destination system, and I need to copy content from source to destination, right? So this is very common in Sitecore upgrades, like in our at work in our current upgrade. So we're like a couple weeks away from just being done. We have 13 tenants using so on SXA sites we have 13 tenants, and there's a lot of content, a lot of media. SXA with SXA you can generate a lot of items. Not to say that's any different than other implementations that are non-SXA, but they're all contained under a particular tree structure that's just expected. It's by design. And so we had a lot. And it was interesting because the team who was trying to migrate their sites to one of our non-production environments, they were creating packages. And packages are not fun because one, you've got to make sure you include the right items. And then if you forget to save the XML project for it, you've got to go do it again. And then now that you've created a package, you've got to download it. You've got to figure out how to get it on the other machine. And that's usually like uploading it, which if you're dealing with like a gig of data, that's just going to take forever. And then you upload it, and then you install it, and then the installation, oh goodness, don't get me started on that because that just takes forever. So essentially what we have is a way to script out what you want to copy. So you would effectively provide a root ID, and then the root ID is checked on both sides, and then the copy is initiated. I do have a comment here that there is an embedded library. So just be aware of the fact that there is a DLL that's in the script, and on the source and destination systems, that is loaded into the, I guess, the app domain. Yeah. So if you get a new version of the script, or you decide that you want to change the DLL to do something different, like you want to compile your own version and do something different, then you just have to recycle the website. Or, like when you drop a DLL or drop a patch into Sitecore, and then it sort of recycles everything, unloads the domain and brings it back up. That's essentially what you'd have to do. So just be aware of that. That could happen. But other than that, you shouldn't have much trouble getting it to work. And so just to reiterate that Unicorn and Rainbow need to be deployed to your Sitecore instance. So if you are already serializing developer assets with Unicorn, then that shouldn't be a problem. Just have whatever the latest version is. Not that that's specifically a requirement, but just make sure that you've got that going, and then you would you would have met that requirement for being able to do that. Why that's important is because we're going to take advantage of the serialization that comes with Rainbow. So the Rainbow library has an implementation that generates YAML data. And so when you are on your local machine and you're developing and you serialize items, perhaps through transparent sync onto disk, you end up with a YML file that has some portion of a Sitecore item written to disk. In some cases, like revision, update, updated by, and updated and created, some of these fields are excluded by default for important reasons. But in this particular case, we're going to just piggyback onto that. And then you also want to have SPE installed and have the remoting enabled. So there's a config that you can drop in there. I think I think in the docs somewhere you can find example patches to do that for you. But basically, you're just telling SPE or Sitecore that I want to allow the remoting to work, and then you want to be able to test out that you can run commands against the Sitecore instance through remoting. So a quick demo, and fingers crossed that this works. Let me end the show real quick. Okay. And you might hear an interruption with my beautiful 2-year-old, and so I'll try to mute if that happens, because everybody's waking up. So what we have here is a sample script where I'm going to import the SPE Remoting module. And then for simplicity's sake, I've written just a small snippet that says, if you're running this in PowerShell ISE on Windows, or you're running this in a console, let's go detect where the script is located. So this is just a shortcut for figuring out where the current directory is, because I need to load this particular function, which is in this file here. So then, like I showed earlier, we've got a secret, we've got a source session. So this is a standard SPE remoting setup where you say, I'm going to create a new script session. It's basically just an object that contains some details, so that every time we run the command, we don't have to like pass it over and over. We don't have to type it in a bunch of different places. So it's really just a reusable object, much like this is, right? So it's just a hash table stuff. But that's where you can contain like credentials and URLs and other bits of information that are used in your script. And so we want to, rely on that. So the source is going to be my test environment. And then the destination is going to be my INT environment. So you might say, I want to pull from old prod to new prod, or, old prod to new int, or whatever, new dev, your local machine, it doesn't matter. You just want to be careful not to make the source be the system that has the source of truth. And then like accidentally reverse it, right? So if you say the source is production, but then you make destination production, then you could potentially wipe out everything. And well, how would the wipeout occur? Well, so there's a couple different parameters that you want to provide, and I think some of these are absolutely necessary, and some of them are there just for convenience. So what we've first done is we've added a what if parameter. So that's going to allow me to run the script and get a sense of what's going to break or what's going to change. So let me just run that real quick. So there's no shock. So here what we have is a message that's letting you know that, look, this is going to run in a test mode. And then we're going to transfer from this machine to this machine. So this is the URL to the content management environment. So you're not going to be doing this on CDs. And it can be used for onto a developer machine, but usually you're going to do like some percentage of content. You might not want to have 2 gigs of data transferred onto your machine. You might just want some pictures and some test data, some test content. This is the root node that we're going to start with. So imagine the Sitecore root node, which is like all ones for the GUID. You're probably not ever going to want to do that, because that's a lot of content, and you don't need most of it. So it's a super wasteful thing to do. What you want is to pick like where in the media library your specific content starts, and assuming that the parent already exists on the other installation, right? So this makes some assumptions that some nodes exist in the tree already, right? So in this particular case, the source does contain this default home item. If the default home item was missing on the other environment, well, it's going to copy that over. But if the content node was just completely missing, well, then this would sort of fail. So you want to just make some assumptions that we at least have the common ancestor, is already there. That's how I'm going to determine what GUID that I want to put here. So once again, this one is the home. I imagine most of you have memorized this already. This is the ID to the home item. I also want to recursively crawl the tree. So I want to get the home item and everything underneath it. And then I want to overwrite. So I don't care what is on the destination system. I just want to squash it. I want maybe someone has changed some content. Maybe a couple items are missing. It's like I don't want to think too much about it. I just want to blow away everything. This would be a good way to do it. It's also like if you know that the environment hasn't been populated before, then overwrite is also a good option. And then remove not in source. So you might be familiar with this in Sitecore Sidekick by Jeff Darchuk. This allows for you to remove items under that tree that don't exist in the source. So where would that happen? Well, let's say, for example, I go into my INT environment and I create a bunch of test pages. And now I'm going to pull down from production or from production to test and then test to INT. And I want to mirror what was in the other environments. So I want to get rid of the junk data. Then the remove not in source would be the option for you. It will just go delete them, move them. I think currently it moves them to the recycle bin. And then if you want to restore it, you'd have the ability to do that. Otherwise, you know that now that tree is mirrored. And then the next options, which I don't appear to have added to this, so we have clear all caches. So that would allow you to refresh the cache in the Sitecore instance that is getting updated. So the destination will be refreshed, if you will. That's important because if you just rewrote an entire tree, then you want to make sure that next time someone requests one of those items that it pulls a brand new item, right? And so then detailed, that's if you just want to see every single thing that's happening spill out into the console. I think for most use cases, you don't care. But if you want to know, like, oh, was this one GUID touched in any way? Like, was it skipped or was it altered? Then you could say detail is true, and then it would know to do that. Now, for those that aren't too familiar with PowerShell, we're making use of a feature called splatting. That's where you take a hash table, which is referenced with $, and you swap out the $ with this @ symbol. That's really like saying copy rainbow, and then I can put all of these. Now, when it says something true, that's likely a switch. So here you can see that clear all cache is a switch. So we're basically saying that this switch is present, and this is the value I want to give it. So you could do clear all caches, and you could also do clear all caches as false, right? And those generally are technically equivalent. But I prefer to go this hash table approach because it's a little bit easier to kind of group all of the parameters together and then run the command. And so then check dependencies. This is going to make sure that the Sitecore instance is up. It's going to make sure that Unicorn's installed. It's going to do a couple other things. Generally, if you're in control of the environments, then you don't need to do that. And so that's an opt-in kind of thing. Like, hey, if you're not quite sure and you don't want it to just waste a bunch of time, then you might do that. Especially like if this is being run automated, like through some sort of continuous integration deployment setup, you might want to check the dependencies because then it will bail out. So if the dependency check fails, it just stops running. And so if no one is watching, then you might want to choose that option. But generally, you don't need it. And so I made it disabled by default. And then boring mode. So what that is doing is currently in some consoles, these emojis will render. And in other consoles, like the vanilla PowerShell console, it doesn't. And so if you enable boring mode, well, then it gets rid of these things. So you can see here that when I run it, that it's just gone. It's just dashes. And so that's boring, but and it's also just a little humor to make it interesting for those running it. So now that we've set this up, let's just briefly talk about what's going on in here. So I'm going to query from the source system. I'm going to hit the database because it's efficient, and I'm going to get all of the items under that tree in all languages. So it's going to look at the revision field, and it's going to get all of the items with their parent, with the revision ID, and the language that revision is in. And that way we can do some comparisons. So I had a friend from the community do a test of like 150,000 items, and they're in multiple languages, and it brought back, you know, a ton of stuff. So if it's 150,000 items, then it's probably more than that because of the fact that it's in multiple languages. But ultimately what you want is if anything changes in any language, then I want to bring it back. Unicorn is going to, or Rainbow is going to serialize everything, all versions in all languages. So we want to check to see if anything is different. So I mentioned that this overwrite is like blow away whatever's there. It doesn't delete things by default, but it does touches all of the items. In this particular case, what I might want to do is compare revision. So you can see that the overwrite in the what if scenario. So let me actually take this what if off. Hopefully it works. So I'm going to just show you that overwrite modifies everything. So now that it's running, you can see that it's giving you a status that, okay, I've done this number of items. So it's doing these big batches. So you can see that it took about 6.5 seconds. If I run it again, so I had deleted them before the demo. So I ran it again, it was faster. It was about twice as fast because of the fact that the items already existed. So Sitecore wasn't having to insert new items, it was just altering the field data. So this is using Sitecore's API to do that. So now you can see, okay, I've got 3 seconds, but what if I don't want to just like override every single time, especially when you have large trees or lots of media? Then you can either do skip existing. So you can see that it's going to now compare against the destination. This console's kind of weird. When you click on it, it moves. So you can see now, different from the previous run, I'm actually getting a list of everything that existed on the destination already. So here I'm going to do a comparison between two hash sets, and I'm going to say what's different between the two, and whatever's different is what I want to process. So I'm going to, by default, do everything. And then if I'm going to compare with the other one, then I start to remove from the list of skips until I find all the ones that are unique or different. So you can imagine the revision. When the revision changes, then we know that, okay, something has altered on this item in any of the languages. We're going to remove those from the skip list, and those are going to be the ones that get processed. So here you can see that I'm spinning up some run spaces, and then I'm going to process at levels. So this particular example, it's just showing percentages of how much has been complete. But the way this runs in bulk is it runs a breadth first search down the tree. So it'll do level 1, which would generally be like one item. And then it'll do level 1. So level 0, level 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it'll just kind of work its way down the tree. And why did I go that approach? Well, imagine you're trying to keep track of what has already been run. Okay, if the home item has already been run, then anything at level 1 can be processed in parallel. Well, okay, what happens when level 1 is processed? Well, then anything at level 2. Well, at this point, level 2 items are like all siblings or cousins, right? So you have, ultimately they have the same root node, but from a level perspective, you have some siblings, and some of those siblings are cousins to another set of items. All of those can actually be run in parallel because they're at the same level. and we assume that the level before has already completed based on the way this is built. So this is like 600 plus lines of a script that makes all this magic work. So now we can just parallelize each level. And so you're going to see parts of the tree where, and actually let me do detailed mode so you get a better sense of what I'm talking about. So you see how it's spilled out a bunch of stuff. So here what we get is I'm going to count out how many items are at each level. So you can see that level 4, sorry, that was the problem that I keep on telling you about. So you can see at level 4, we jump from 12 to 29 items. And these are all siblings or cousins. And then when you go to level 5 and level 6, so this is an uncommon in a tree structure, right? So you go to a website and level 1 is like all of the main navigation that appears on the page. And then underneath that, you get more pages. And under that, you get more pages. And maybe one part of the tree is like a job, like job pages or location pages. And so that one tree at that level, so let's just say level 4, one of the children of level 4 has like 1,000 items underneath it, right? So you can see like parts of the tree just sort of blow up. But that's not all the case. It's not always the case for everything that you do. But what we've done is we've done these big batches of say, look, just give me all the stuff. And then once I get it, then I can process it. And so if we look further down, you can see that it's processing these chunks at a given time. And really what we're just doing is saying, when I get to 10%, just let someone know that I'm at 10%. That way you're not, sitting here staring at the screen guessing. So let me go back to clean mode. Okay, so now we got all this. And there you go. We've transferred. Now you can see that the processed is how many items I had from the beginning. So those should match. And then updated is how many items were transmitted to be updated and were actually updated. So if there was a problem installing an item, then it would come back with an error, and then you'd see this error say 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever. And then skipped. So updated plus skipped should be the total process. Now, pulled and pushed is how many back and forth I've made between systems. So pulled is how many times I've made a request from the source, and push is how many requests I made to the destination. So these numbers should always match, but they don't run as fast. So the pushes are always slower because it's slower to ingest the items than it is to extract them, right? So if it's already existing, we can extract it super fast, but then afterwards it just sort of takes forever. And there is some throttling to this so that we don't bring back everything and then still waiting to send stuff. So you get, I think there's like 3 pulls that occur, and at some point it just waits until the pushes are finished so that it can get the next one. So why is that important? Well, imagine you've got media and you bring back a 10 megabyte picture or a couple 10 megabyte pictures. We don't want to download all of that and then it just sit waiting to be pushed to the server, because you could end up coming back with like 8 gigs of data and your system runs out of memory. So we want to kind of keep track of that. So I'd love for someone on the call to give it a try, share with me the results of like, okay, I did this tree of this number of items. So you basically just copy the non-detailed version of it, and that would give me some sense of like how impressive this is working. Once again, it's been tested on over 150,000 items and seems to work reliably. Now, one key point, someone that might ask this is, how does it handle content versus media? Well, media is much bigger, and one picture could be worth tons of items. So what we've done is we break out the sort of the way the bulk mode works. We divide up media into smaller batches. I think it's like 10 at a time. So hopefully you're not trying to extract videos, right? Videos don't belong in Sitecore. They should be in a DAM or on YouTube or some other system designed for that. So you wouldn't be doing content migrations of videos. You would be doing, pictures, icons, and things like that. So what it will do is it will batch those so the payloads are smaller, and then we're also able to total up what is there. So if I set this back to overwrite, you can see that once it's completed, that I've transferred less than a megabyte of data. So if you were doing media, then you could imagine that number growing to be something like a megabyte or 10 megabytes or 100 megabytes. One example I ran the other day was almost 800 megabytes, and it seemed to do fine. It does it in batches. I was able to, walk away and come back and see the progress because the status was reporting to me every 10% how many items it had processed. And so in this case, I think it was around 3,900 items processed. In general, I recommend that you do compare revision. That's going to compare, it's going to adequately compare the data that comes from the source and the destination, and compare the revisions, the languages, make sure that they are either the same or different, and only when that's the case. If you do skip existing, what you end up with is like a new item only, like only add it if it was missing, but don't ever look at it again. And so we want to keep fresh content, and so compare revision is probably the option you should go with all the time. Now, if it's the first time for you to run it, you can do any three of them. They effectively will work the same. So if the children don't exist for that tree, it's essentially doing the same thing. It's just copying everything over. But compare revision and skip existing will just go validate that the items don't exist before it runs, but it'll see that everything is missing and it will run it anyways. Except maybe the home item or the root node. The root node might already exist, and so then it will skip that one item. Any questions about the content migrator?
So in chat, I can see one. So Shri Krishna has asked me, does this have an option to disable my background jobs while migrating the content, like indexing?
So by default, the way this is written is it doesn't impact, like it doesn't change the behavior of what the system is already doing. Like, so for example, it won't stop crawling. It won't stop your scheduled tasks from running. Like it won't do anything with that. But what it will do is when it runs, it wraps the process in a security disabler. And that, because like if I'm running through remoting, then I assume that I have, admin access. So we don't need to be checking the access at this time. It also disables events for this piece, so it wraps it in a event disabler. You can actually see. Let me see GitHub. So you can see on GitHub, if you go to the repository, there's some more details about the code that's actually being written to do that. So while this is loading, I'll go back to it. So there's and you may have done this already before in C#, where you wrap calls to edit items in like a bulk update context or security disabler or event disabler or some other using statement that Sitecore provides. So it essentially does that. So you don't have to worry about this like cascading of events because you've ingested 150,000 items. If you're doing that kind of volume, even if you're doing a volume of like 5,000, you might not want to trigger a reindex because you might do several parts of the tree and intend to just recrawl everything at the end. And so you're going to go manually do that. So we don't want to impose on the system anything unnecessarily. So we're going to just say, look, I'm going to run this and I'm going to do everything without making a big deal about it, I am going to give you the option to purge the cache for in case someone is going into the content editor and you want it to reload the item. You don't want it to pull the cached version, because then now they've got a version in the content tree that's in from the cache that's different than what has been put into the database. So that option is obviously going to be there. If you're looking for something beyond that, send me some details about like specific use case where you say this won't work for this reason, and here's what you might consider changing. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. All right, so on GitHub, if I'm not logged in this browser, so if we go to SPE Content Migrator, might bring me up. Okay, and what makes this work is a combination of the SPE Remoting and I don't know, I probably could have come up with a better library name, but this is what I started off with, is I've created a bulk item extractor and installer. And so this code runs on both sides. So you get the extractor runs on the source side. And so you can see I've got some embedded code for Unicorn and Rainbow. And here it's going to extract items, write it to text, and then send it back to the page, or send it back to the script that gets transferred. And then the installer it's not ingesting it directly to the database. It's still going through the Sitecore API, but what you end up with is the appropriate disablers to hopefully help it speed things up. And I did find that in taking the approaches that I've taken, that it has been the most reliable and the best performing option. So if we were to summarize what is the SPE Content Migrator, it's a blend of concepts from Razzle and Sitecore Sidekick and rolled up into a PowerShell script. So the focus is not on UI management, because the focus is I'm spinning up a new environment and I want to bring everything over quickly, and I don't want to have backups that go stale. I just want to migrate everything quickly that's fresh right now. So this is the target audience. But if you're working on a project and you're like, hey, I want to do a quick update for one item, you might still want to use Razzle or Sitecore Sidekick's Content Migrator. But for me, I felt really comfortable with this because I didn't have to be logged into Sitecore, and it achieved a performance that was acceptable for me. So if my team says, hey, I've got this new tree that I want you to copy over, I don't want to wait, and I don't want to be concerned about the performance of it. They need it now. So this worked out really well for me. Any other questions?
Michael, just one question. It's kind of a suggestion, not sure. But do we have anything kind of reporting? That is, I have some 1,000 items. So before performing, that is while performing, what if we get a difference between the source and target? And then after actually performing, if the user is able to download the reports of what exactly has been migrated?
That is a good idea. I mean, right now, the only report that you would get is if you did the detailed option. So I guess the suggestion is being able to extract what runs and then be able to get that. One thing I was going to explore, and I can't remember the syntax, but there's some sort of syntax like something weird like this that Sitecore uses during the SIF installs. You basically redirect the output into a text file. So what you would probably do is you would run it in detailed mode in this case, and you would see what items are being skipped and what's not. So in this case, if I did overwrite, then you can see that I process different levels. I'm queuing certain things. You can see that every time a request was made, this is how many items were altered. So this might be some of what you want. It obviously isn't everything that you want. So what we could probably do is just explore how to take whatever would have come from here and dump it out to like a text file. Probably then the second version of that would be getting more information. Because see, right now it doesn't really get anything besides IDs of items. So it doesn't know about title, or it doesn't know about item path and things like that. So there would have to be like an extra step to go extract that from Sitecore to provide the report. So I think probably the best first thing to do is just make sure that someone has a more complete record about what items were changing or going to be changing as part of this process. So I'll look a little bit into it, and if I come up with a reasonable solution to it, then you'll see it as an update to the repository. But you're welcome to go star the repository and then or watch it, and then when things change, then you'll have an idea that, oh, Michael just made an update and this is what it's including.
Yep.
That help? Yeah. Any other questions about this?
So one question from my end, Michael. So like when we use compare revision, is it kind of a same logic when we use a smart publish to move items from master to web?
Yes, it would be a very similar approach. So when you do compare revision, what it's going to do is it's going to get all of the items, and in my particular case at least, it's considering that specific language and all the other languages. And it's going to say, do the revisions match? And if none of the revisions match, then it knows, okay, yeah, obviously we're going to bring it back. But if at least one revision is different, it will bring back everything as well. So where that's important is, let's say, for example, you've got a page where it has 7 languages. And on the latest version, in one of the languages, something was changed. Well, then it's going to bring the whole thing back. It's going to bring the whole page back. And so you want that, because then you want to make sure that you don't have differences in the versions. So the migration is going to cover that kind of scenario. I'm not sure, like in the case of I assume the publishing is going to do a similar kind of comparison. I think in the publishing, though, you have options to consider languages. So it might allow you to filter out, like, only publish this one language when you're doing the smart publish, where this doesn't allow you to exclude that. First, because the rainbow serialization doesn't filter out versions, and it doesn't filter out languages. It's just like the whole item. So we're just going to piggyback onto that. So if there was an option in Rainbow to filter by version or language, then that's what we do. But another point to make is that if someone were to change a different version, so let's say, for example, the item's on version 7 in English, and they have changed version 3, then it wouldn't pick that up. And to really think about it, well, if someone is using workflows, they really should have gone to like a version 8 instead of changing old things that have already been through the workflow. So just something to think about is that it's only looking at latest version in every language. Yeah. Okay. Any other questions about anything that I've walked through so far? Well, I know everyone is jumping to go to watch the cricket game. And so I appreciate all of the questions that you've had. And once again, if you've got more feedback that you'd like to share, then I'd love to hear about it. Just a couple resources that you might be interested in. A member of the community, Shelly, she, I think, is presenting at this user group next month after the symposium. She has produced some Pluralsight courses. So this is not a paid advertisement, but I thought I would just advertise for her. She has produced some courses. I think the Getting Started, that one is definitely already there. And I'm not quite sure if the other two are already published or on the verge of being published. But if you're looking for training that is not distributed from Sitecore, but maybe you've already gone through that and you want something else, or maybe you already have a subscription to Pluralsight, or you're looking to get that, then now this would be a good time to sign up, because there are some Sitecore courses on Pluralsight. So not only are you learning about .NET Core and other things, you can refresh on this. And I believe she said Sitecore 10 courses are being these are being refreshed with Sitecore 10 version. So you might check those out. Also, Sitecore has its own YouTube channel, Master Sitecore. It's got a lot of great content, especially more recently they've put details about Docker and SXA on there, so you might have a look there. And finally, the SXA short unofficial channel. This is all community developed, so there isn't some sort of official Sitecore publishing of content here. This was an idea from Adam and others to say, how can we publish SXA content that anyone can author and is helpful to get people up and running on the product. So you might check out the SXA channel. They cover everything. I mean, how to do rendering variants, how to build, like there's a couple where it's like how to build a site from scratch, and you go through everything, theming and all that. So definitely encourage you to check out those free paid and free resources. Well, and that's all I have for today. It's good that I'm cutting it short before all the hard questions are being asked. Any other last questions for me that maybe I can jump to? All right. Well, I thank you for your time today, and look forward to talking to you all soon.